Welcome to this presentation, the ancient tribal rites of passage that develop boys into men. And this presentation is all about how modern day society is failing our boys. And it's actually a very interesting story taken from one of the tribes of Africa, the Maasai warrior tribe, about the processes and the training techniques and how they develop their young boys into men. So I think it's something very profound and something that we're lacking in modern day society. But I think there's a lot to take from it, and it's definitely worth exploring further. So without further ado, let's get into it. So just before I start the presentation, a bit of a foreword. This presentation is based on the work of a 19th century French anthropologist named Arnold van Gennep, and he was someone that spent a lot of time with various tribes out in Africa and places like that, and he would observe, their culture and their rituals and their customs and various things that they did, and he was the one who came up with the rites of passage. So that's someone that you can research further. This particular presentation is based on the sacred rites of passage of the Maasai warrior tribe, and in particular that of their lion hunt. Again, something you can research further for yourself. It's not something that they do anymore. They've actually changed it to a more kind of Olympic Games style thing. But I find the lion hunt story a bit more powerful in terms of what it conveys. I think it probably would have been more powerful in terms of how it developed people, but obviously, it's not something that we can really promote in the modern 21st century. But just the notion of it, just try and put yourself in the mind and the thoughts of the feelings of the people that went through it as I talk about this. There's additional information that kind of has come from my personal lived experience. I currently work with young people, operate an alternative provision, education provision. So I work with young boys that are struggling in education, and I also work as a boxing coach and mentor for organisations such as youth offending teams. So I get to see firsthand how a lot of these young people are affected, and also their greater circumstances, such as their family life and all the other things like their community, where they're growing up, all the factors that affect them. So that's what I bring to this, as well as various other information from personal research. I personally have ADHD. I struggled growing up as a young person in the education system, and I got into trouble a lot with the law when I was younger. Growing up as a man, trying to find myself as a man and understand how to be a man is something that I have had, to learn the hard way, so to speak. And I feel that, a lot more could have been done to help myself and other young people growing up. And also for this reason, it's a topic that I've researched extensively. So, I know a lot about it. Now, this topic, the topic of masculinity, for some reason, has now become a bit of a taboo topic. It's almost, frowned upon to be, a big, strong, masculine man. I think this is something we kind of need to change, and we need to kind of talk about. However, it is a complex and nuanced subject matter, and for those of you that aren't, common with the up to date with the term nuance, it means that there's difference to every scenario. There's no such thing as black or white. There's many shades of grey. However, I'd like you to think of the bigger picture when it comes to all of this, rather than just focusing on specific details, because there are overarching factors that I think make a lot of sense, and things that we can do to improve things for our young people. And the whole point of this presentation is just to provide an understanding around this topic and how we can do things differently to improve young boys' lives and also improve society in general. So this brings me on to what is a rite of passage. Technically, a rite of passage is defined as a ritual or event that marks a person's transition from childhood to adulthood and full inclusion into a tribe or social group. The concept of the rite of passage explores and describes various other milestones in an individual's life when their social status is forever altered. Most of the ancient rites of passage can be separated and classified into 5 groups. These are the right to birthright, the right to adulthood, the right to marriage, the right to eldership, and the right to ancestorship. But without going into unnecessary details, these can actually be simplified down into three different groups, or three different stages, and these are separation, transition, and reincorporation. However, there is also another stage that I would like to touch on before we kind of go into the three main stages of the rite of passage, and that is that of pre-separation. So this would be for although it applies to boys and girls, obviously this presentation is about boys. So that's what I'll be referencing mostly to in this presentation. So this would be for the infant and pre-teen child phase of life. During this time, the boys would be spending most of their time with their mothers. Well, this is like throughout the day when the men are out hunting and doing whatever it is that doing all the stuff that the men of the tribe would do. And it's important to note that there'd be things such as more than one woman involved in the raising of the child. For example, the child room would be overseen by the matriarch of the tribe, and that's something I think is just worth noting, because in today's society, it's typically one man and one woman, or in many cases with the young people I work with, from single parent households, the dad isn't around for whatever reason. It's just one woman, and a lot of the time as well, it's very young women in their 20s, even teenage years, and they don't often have a lot of help from anyone else. And in the tribal aspect, the elders of the tribes, the matriarchs of the tribe who've got that experience of raising the kids, they're there to oversee, the raising of the kids. The younger women would tend to be the ones that would have the children because they're younger and it's less dangerous for them. But it's just an interesting social structure that they have there, compared to kind of our modern day society where it's just one man and one woman, or just one woman on her own. The children would be involved with daily tasks involved with looking after the camp, so they would still be given tasks and chores to do, helping with whatever the activities were that the women did. It's important to note that in this phase, the boys and girls were raised very similarly, with what's mainly known as a nurturing approach. And this is very important for kids, if you have any understanding of emotional development, especially in children. Those early years, it's very important that they get that kind of strong, healthy, loving upbringing, so that they can develop they get that healthy emotional development, and it provides that strong foundation for adult life. But once they kind of get towards the end of their childhood, which is those childhood years 10, 11, and they start coming into their early teenage years, that's where the first stages of the rites of passage would begin to take place. So the first step in the rites of passage would be separation, and this would take place around 8 or 9 years of age, give or take a few years. Now, for the African Massai tribe, this would be marked by a ceremony with the women handing the boys over to the men to basically signify, I have done my part in raising them. Now it's your turn to take them on and develop them into the men that they need to be. The boys would be sent off to live together in a separate camp, so they typically wouldn't tend to have much interaction with the women during this point. And the main raising of the boys would be now done by the men. And this is something that I think is very profound and what we're lacking in modern society, because so many boys just don't get that constant positive male role model attention that they need. So the second stage of the traditional rite of passage is the transition. During this phase, the initiate is in a state of transformation or limbo. The individual is no longer part of his or her old life, but it's not yet fully inducted into a new one. The transition is usually marked by a series of tests deeming whether the initiate is worthy of this new life. So for this stage, they would learn all the skills necessary for providing and protecting the tribe. So things such as hunting, things such as self-defense, things such as going out getting firewood, how to build, their houses, all these kinds of things they'll be learning. But important point to note with this stage is the natural teenage rebellion phase would be kept in check by the adult males with firm boundaries. And it's natural for young boys to want to start testing things, pushing the boundaries, And it's very important at this stage that they have those bigger, stronger men around them who can keep them in check. This stage would be about developing them into capable individuals who are independent, resilient, and understanding their role in the community. So, if it's not just about developing them themselves, it's also making them sure that they understand, what their role is in that community and what they're kind of there, what their greater purpose is. This step would have tough experiences, but one that served the purpose of building them into warriors that could look after the tribe. And this is an important point to note, because I personally feel that we have become too safety conscious. We kind of almost too worried about things upsetting people, safe spaces, all that kind of stuff, that people don't become prepared for the real world. You have to be able to develop resilience. You have to know how to handle problems in order to get by in life, because the world isn't a nice place a lot of time. And it's only by developing these skills, emotional resilience, that you can get through and become successful. But once they've kind of gone through all of this, the end point of this phase would be what's known as the line hunt. So the line hunt is what you kind of call the penultimate aspect of this stage. It's where everything they've worked towards kind of comes to fruition, and what they've been waiting for happens. This step would take place around the age of 16, once the boys' training was complete. They would be sent off to survive in the wild and hunt a lion. And if you notice, this is a separation stage again. I've heard stories in the past that they were told to go off, and survive for a period of 3 months. I don't know how true that is, but one thing that is definitely true is that they would go off and hunt a lion. I think this used to be done individually, but then in more recent times it was as a group, up until that kind of practice stopped. And obviously during this stage, if you think about when they're going off on their own, the fear that they must feel, but they must also have a sense of excitement. And it's not like they're just being sent off without any training or anything, not knowing what they're doing at all. They've just spent the past 5 or 6 years training for this moment, and this is what's really going to give them the opportunity to show that they can be a warrior in the tribe. During this stage, they would have to make use of all their training, and if they returned alive, they would officially be classed as a man, and if they returned with a dead lion, they would be classed as a warrior. This would be a very scary and dangerous stage, but the most important thing to note with it would complete the psychological transformation from a boy to man. Once they return, the things that they've probably gone through on this time on their own. I hate to think what it would have been like, but when you came back, you would have a full understanding of the reality of life, a full understanding of your capabilities as a man. But notice the emphasis on survivability. So the third and final chapter for the initiate is the reincorporation. After the individual has proved himself worthy for a series of tests, the initiate is welcomed back into society and given a grand celebration of their new life. This stage would honour the young men and make them feel valued members of the tribe. It's important to note they've gone out, they've done this hard work, they've achieved these things, and they're being praised for it and they're being recognised for it, which is really adding to their self-worth, and making them feel valued members. They would feel secure in their purpose and enable them to take pride in serving their community. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't feel valued by the community that you live in, why are you ultimately going to feel any need to serve it and better it? And I think that's something we really need to kind of think. If you know that the people that are in your tribe value you and care for you and want the best for you, and appreciate you, then you're going to be motivated to want to take care of those people that are around you. In some instances, the men would only be allowed to marry and have kids once they'd passed this stage, because they've shown that they have what it takes to be good fathers, in particular providing and protecting. And that's something to think about as well, in terms of the kind of men that women choose, without going into dating and all that kind of stuff as well. But it was a clear indication that someone has what it takes to be a good father and be a good provider and serve the community. And in particular, the thing with today's modern society is that we're lacking the traditional rites of passage aspect. There is no real route for boys to go out there. I mean, we do have the standard education kind of route and stuff like that, but there's nothing that really marks a boy to man's transition, that develops their character, that shows that they really have become a man of value. And there's also something I would like everyone to think about with this as well, various factors to contemplate. This presentation uses the ancient tribe as an analogy for primitive biological drives that still exist in all of us today. In particular, I'm talking, about the men, and, how they need to kind of operate and what they need to go through in order to become fully functional men. But there's other things with the tribe that you kind of can think about and discuss. And one of those is the kind of naturally occurring gender roles that take place within the tribe. And this is not to try and get into this debate too much, but the people in the tribe would just naturally do what they're biologically aligned to do, playing to their strengths, and letting other people play to their strengths, rather than trying to conflict and take over one another's roles. And in particular, that is that the men are the protectors and the providers, or the warriors and the hunters and the gatherers, and the women are the nurturers and the caregivers. And it's that structure that enables the tribe to function cohesively as a unit, and to, you need both of those aspects, and without one another, that they complement each other, rather than trying to take each other on. They're working together. Something I'm very into is masculine and feminine polarity. I think this is what we've kind of come away from largely as a society, and I think people are confused about kind of where they are. Again, there's nuance to these topics, but I feel once you learn to embrace your inner masculinity or your inner femininity, it makes life a lot simpler and a lot more straightforward. Something very important to note is biologically and psychologically, boys and men function and are driven by different motivating factors to women. And we have to take into account those different factors and those different drives when raising our young people. How boys and girls are raised requires different approaches based on these differences. And the rites of passage, in particular for the boys, were based on these understandings, the understanding the different roles that men and women needed to play. And there are also rites of passage that women have to go through, but again, that's a topic for another presentation. This is a presentation in particular about men. What is important to note in regards to the old tribal rites of passage is that as a society we have progressed far from what could be judged by modern day standards as quite brutal and barbaric. And a lot of this is thanks to women having a feminine input into society. Things such as being sent off to the jungle to survive for months is not something that should be advocated for today. There are, however, some key takeaway points from it which we should implement into how we raise modern day men. In particular, there needs to be a solid social structure for boys to spend time with positive male role models, ones that not only nurture but provide leadership and enforce adequate boundaries. That a process in the form of rites of passage could be implemented, allowing boys to progress along and be celebrated for once they get to the end of it. And also, modern day education from nursery to university could be partially considered this, but it is limited in terms of who can succeed. Things such as neurodivergence, even just things such as boys and girls, how they operate on a day-to-day basis. And the education system as well does not focus on the psychological, emotional development of young people. And I'll put in brackets, just before I go on to the brackets, developing character. That's not what we really focus on. We focus on academic achievement, getting that knowledge into the mind to repeat and perform a test, but we don't actually look at developing things such as self-control, discipline, mental strength, that kind of thing, which to an extent is almost more important than a lot of the educational aspect. And back to the brackets, the hunter versus farmer aspect. This is a theory that some people are naturally what you call hunters, and this is a theory that comes with ADHD, that you're kind of designed to go out and you're driven by excitement, you're driven by always being ready to spot the next opportunity, whereas some people are more calm and more placid and they have more patience naturally, and they're people more biologically naturally aligned to doing things such as farming, taking their time with things, and you need both of these kinds of people for society to function, and we need to implement that into our educational system. Again, I briefly touched on this earlier, around being overprotective to safety conscious. The only real development you get in life, is from kind of suffering and painful experiences. When you're overprotected from the reality of life, it inhibits your emotional growth. There is a need for some pain and suffering to be for our emotional growth to be achieved, but the important point to note with all of this is it just isn't to the extent that it causes severe trauma. You have to build psychological strength over time. Same with any form of strength. You have to gradually, increase the stress that the person or the body is put under. If you do too much stress in one go, it damages and can break and never be repaired. However, little bits of discomfort over time actually build you and strengthen you. There are key biological, physical, and psychological differences between males and females which need to be taken into account when raising a child. Differences which, if not accounted for, can lead to a whole array of issues. In particular, the focus on nurture appears to be becoming the dominant driving force in education and school policies, with leadership and character building appearing to have taken a back seat. And the most important thing is boys need that positive masculine influence in order to develop into emotionally mature and capable adults. And this is something that is very big as well. Men need, notice the capital letters, they need to be honoured for the role that they play in their community. Without this, they tend to feel lost. They don't know what they're doing, what they're about, why they're living for. And this is, I think, one of the reasons that contribute to why males are the highest number of people to commit suicide out of everyone. I'm just going to touch on, I'll say what I personally think are some of the issues that are kind of causing the problems that we're facing with young men, and some of the factors that have kind of contributed towards it. One of them is that the role of providing and protecting for the family has in many instances been taken over by the government and the state, rendering men theoretically obsolete in many cases. So, for example, whereas before men used to be able to kind of defend their family or stuff like that, it's now taken over by the police. If anything kind of happens, even if you're attacked and you're fighting in self-defense, you can be at risk of going to prison for that. So it makes people very cautious around defending their families, and in other situations as well, with things such as child benefit and that kind of thing, and marriage. Women can easily divorce men now, and they get given a place to live and child benefit and stuff like that. So women don't need men the same way that they used to. Now, I'm not arguing whether this is a good or bad thing. I'm just trying to point out how it has affected the situation. In many cases, this is a good step forwards because it enables many children to have their basic needs met, and it protects women, which are all good things. But what it has caused is there is now a gaping chasm of leadership and discipline left in its wake for boys, because where they used to have the men around them, that's kind of gone. And when it comes to kind of two-parent families, forgetting the tribe for the moment, a common notion would be that dad would discipline the child and then mum would comfort the child, but they would both stand by the boundaries that have been set. And this is, we've kind of only got one part of the puzzle now, which is the mum comforting the child, and not really that strong, firm discipline and leadership in place either. But further to that topic, obviously absent fathers are an issue that play into this, and it is an issue that needs to be addressed. However, that's another further complex subject, and it's a subject for another video. However, I would like to note that this does also apply to fathers that are present but not strong in their leadership or actively involved with their children. So I feel there is further work to be done in terms of training men and working with men, in particular the ones that are still there with their kids, about how they can be more actively involved in their kids' upbringing and the importance of that. But one thing that I've noticed with, in the work that I do, and this is a common theme, um, it's literally an epidemic of boys reaching their teenage years and they're becoming too physically big and strong for their mothers to control. And when you've got a boy that's bigger than his mum, he's messing around. The mum's saying you can't go out, you can't do this, trying to implement a consequence like taking his phone off him or something like that, and he just goes "F you, mum," and then takes his phone back off her, pushes himself out of the way, pushes her out of the way, and walks out the door. And in some cases, even abusive to his mum. Um, there's nothing she can do to control that, and the only thing that really can deal with that is a bigger and stronger man. And without things even getting to that extent, boys tend to respond to the bigger physical stature and presence of men, because they just feel it. They feel it inside. Respect is a combination of love and fear. You have to be wary of the person, and the fact that they know they can just push their mothers around. It's a shame that they don't respect their mothers like that, but in situations where there is trauma and all kinds of problems with the upbringing, this is the reality that we're facing, and trying to deal with that is difficult when you don't have men in their lives who they respond to. So this now brings us on to the aspect where the gang-related activity becomes involved, which is a direct causation of not having enough positive male role models around them. The natural male drive for dominance and acquiring resources, or aka money, leads to boys becoming involved with gangs, or looking for other influences online for direction. People such as Andrew Tate have become very popular for this reason. They will also look up to those who espouse those traits, overlooking the negative aspects of those traits. So, when these young boys are seeing the drug dealers with their fast cars and their nice clothes, and the women, that's what they want. That's a natural male drive. But obviously, they're not really thinking about the negative aspects of that. Such as risking your life, risking ending up in prison. All those kinds of things that can happen. With the lack of a strong foundation at home and the influence of gang life, schools struggle to get the most out of these boys. The schools are very limited in how they can deal with these problems. And something I've noticed as well, working in various schools, and in particular pupil referral units, often in schools there are antisocial and criminal behaviours exhibited, but there's not much that the school can actually do when it comes to dealing with it, especially as many of these schools have a complete no contact policy. So they're reluctant to even restrain a kid even if they're being attacked. And this kind of also leads on to just the law in general. Violent and abusive behaviour below the age of 16 is not punishable in law, so there is no effective way to deal with this. And this is not me really saying that criminalisation is the answer, but I do think we need to have some more effective strategies, early intervention methods that we can deal with some of the more hardcore stuff. Just because there is no effective way of dealing with things doesn't mean that we should leave it unaddressed. Something that's very important for boys to learn is to not be subject to their emotions and develop self-control. So a young man that grows up into, a boy that grows up into a man who cannot control his emotions and release them in a healthy way becomes either a very dangerous man, or he becomes incapable. And neither of those are people that are suitable for a civilized, productive society. So this is something important to know, and I think you are kind of seeing the two extremes of that at the moment, becoming ever more prevalent. Firstly, with the dangerous side, people becoming involved in gangs, all the stabbings and the shootings, but also the men that go out and rape and attack women and all that kind of stuff. That's because they can't deal with things such as rejection. And then you've got the incapable, which is also linked to the incel aspect, but there's also the aspect where you just have no motivation, you have no drive, and you're not capable of dealing with the tough aspects that are required to become successful in life and endure in it. And this is one of the most important slides, which is linked to everything that I've spoken about, because the rites of passage are all about developing that character. They're all about developing men emotionally to build resilience and become capable, self-reliant individuals. When you haven't learned to control your emotions, or you've repressed your emotions, you develop things such as a hair trigger temper, which results in unnecessary fights. Things such as insane jealousy, which leads to things such as controlling behaviour and stalking, or in worst case scenarios, rape and murder, in particular that of women. Alcohol, drug abuse and binge eating, which is used to smother their feelings. Emotionally insecure people who require constant validation, which leads to manipulative behaviours. But in particular, this links into the incel aspect. If you're not emotionally secure in yourself, you struggle to do things such as meet women, and you then build up resentment, because you can't meet and you can't get women. So it has so many important reasons as to why we need to develop these men. And not only that, not only the women's side of things, there's also the aspect when it comes to applying for a job, or doing anything that involves a social aspect. These people as well, in many cases, I'm not saying, for example, the emotionally insecure people never manage to find a partner, but when they do and they end up having children, this results in things such as narcissistic and neglectful parenting, and it also leads to a lot of abusive behaviours when they're in relationships as well. So I think the core emphasis really is on learning to develop and putting in place strategies to develop people emotionally so they become emotionally healthy adults. So back to the more positive aspect of this presentation, we need to develop solid social paths for men that are inclusive and lead to recognition. We need to develop men psychologically, emotionally, and building resilience and self-control. Give a man those capabilities and he can achieve wonders. We need to focus on building early interventions that recognise and deal with these issues before they reach the criminal stage, or even not necessarily the criminal stage, but any stage where they start to cause problems for the person themselves or the greater society at large. We need education to be more inclusive around different learning styles and needs so that more have a chance to succeed. And a lot has been done in the education sector, but as someone who works in schools, I still feel there's a lot of work to be done in education. And also we need to have more education in general around trauma, and in particular generational trauma, and work with families around that to heal from it and transcend it. And if you don't know what generational trauma is, it's how particular traumas travel down. I mean, it's in the name, travel down through different families. But as someone who works with people that have, families that have a lot of trauma, and you tend to see, how the different things such as emotional abuse or neglect or even sexual abuse, that kind of stuff travels down through the families. And it's interesting how it manifests. But it takes, you have to get a break in at a certain point, and the only way we can do that is by educating more around this topic. A very big factor of this as well, and it's something that I'm actively working on doing at the moment, is we need to incorporate more positive male role models into the education system that focus on the social and emotional aspect of development rather than just the academic achievement. And things such as boxing and martial arts training work directly with a man's drive for dominance and provides a safe channel and outlet for expressing these tendencies. These sports can also be used as a mechanism for achieving rites of passage stages, for example training, which is the separation stage, competing, which is the transition stage, and the recognition of achievement or the reincorporation on completion. So they go off to training camp, or they train in the boxing, for example. They then have their boxing fight, and then afterwards they get their reward for taking part, and everyone celebrates, and recognises, the bravery and the hard work that they've put into it. And we can have these on more shorter term situations, and we can have them set out on more longer term situations incorporated into the education system. So it's not just about the physical learning, so to speak, there's also the character development that's taken place. In conclusion, this is not the full solution. The problem is a complex one and requires a multifaceted approach. There's also socio-economic factors, there's cultural and political factors all at play in all of this, but you've got to start somewhere. I believe that fixing it begins by creating a strong foundation for raising young men and a complete and proper understanding of what young men need. We also, as a society and our communities, we really need to kind of come to agreement of what the common values that we want, to have as a society. What do we want? What do we truly value? And we need to kind of bring that back, because a large part of values and morals have gone. There appears to be no clear framework anymore. And the only way that we're going to begin making a change is by kind of actually agreeing on what we value, what morals we agree to, what values we need to stick by, and then adhere to that. Unfortunately, this is probably going to be the most difficult part of it. But however, I have faith in the future, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's given you something to think about. Yeah, we need to work with masculinity and develop it and nurture it and value it for what it is rather than condemn it. And I believe that we can make positive changes for the future.